Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the Game 2 between the Golden Knights and the San Jose Sharks, in which the Sharks lost 5-3, and so these two first games in San Jose ends up being a split between these two teams. It's said that you're not in trouble until you lose a game at home. The Sharks have now done so, and so in these last the last potential 5 games of the series, it'll be the Golden Knights with 3 home games to the Sharks 2, so they could be in a bit of trouble unless they can win a game in Vegas like Vegas did here in San Jose. And this game started off quite poorly, as it looked like the Sharks had turned a page with that game 1, that they had just a superb game all around, but it looked like they went back a page, playing like they did at the end of the regular season. Some poor plays in the defensive zone, just as usual, giving up that first goal. It was about a minute in when Eakin scored. Then just a few minutes later, Colin Miller on a short-handed play in which the Sharks had a 5-on-3 for about a minute, did absolutely nothing with that. Then Erik Karlsson with an ill-advised pass, which allows this 2-on-1 to happen. Colin Miller gets the goal, and don't worry, I'll get to Martin Jones at a later point, so I won't mention anything there. And then a couple minutes later, it's Max Pacioretty who makes it 3-0 Golden Knights. And the weirdest part is that while the Sharks were playing very, very bad early on, right before they got that 5-on-3, the Sharks weren't playing too badly after that, and yet they gave up the goal to Miller and the goal to Pacioretty. I mean, the power plays were ineffective, and they couldn't get anything past Fleury early on, and they found themselves in a 3-0 hole, mostly thanks to the poor play from the power play and the poor play of Martin Jones. But as the first period goes on and we come to the last couple of minutes, the Sharks finally managed to get not 1, not 2, but 3 past Marc-Andre Fleury, who up to that point had been getting a bit lucky with some posts and some help from his defensemen, but also making some nice saves. However, it's Couture, Hertl, and Thornton within just a couple minutes of each other to tie that game up at 3 in a first period that featured 6 goals, 8 penalties. It was a crazy first period, one of the most crazy first periods I've seen in a long time, and it was a completely new game going into the second period. And here's where the major controversy started. Just a couple minutes in, the Sharks look like they score, but it's called off on the ice for goal interference, and Logan Couture is assessed a penalty for it. And on further review from the replay, it's pretty clear Marc-Andre Fleury is miles out of his crease, basically. And I can see why in real time the referee would call that this looked like goal interference, because at real time it sort of did, but I do not see any universe in which this should ever be a penalty, even viewed through real time. And it seemed as though unless DeBoer just chose not to challenge this, which seems unlikely with the amount of challenges DeBoer has been thrown out for much more minor infractions, it seems as though the fact that Couture was assessed a penalty in this situation prevented DeBoer from challenging this. And honestly, there was about a 50-50 chance that this goal could have been overturned and been called a goal on the ice if a challenge had occurred. But instead, the referees decide to assess a penalty, and just to make matters worse, the Golden Knights end up scoring. Mark Stone scores on that very same power play that the Golden Knights get from the goal interference call to take the 4-3 lead, and that ends up being the game winner. So just a horrible situation all the way on for the San Jose Sharks. I have no idea what the referee is doing calling a penalty in that situation. And the Sharks fell behind 4-3 and could never get another one past Fleury, who, even though he let in 3 goals in this game, played a very, very good game, at least compared to the Sharks goaltenders, who, again, I will get to a bit later. The second period goes on. The Sharks are getting some decent chances. The Golden Knights are getting a couple of decent chances of their own. Dell and Fleury not letting them in. We go on to the third period, and the Sharks are getting all the shots, but none completely dangerous, although Fleury did have to make a couple of very nice saves. And then the Knights, one opportunity in the third period, it's shorthanded again on one of the Sharks' many power plays. William Karlsson on the breakaway manages to deke out Aaron Dell and take the 5-3 lead, which would end up being the final score. The Sharks, just even with the goalie pulled for about 3 minutes and a power play late in the game, just still nothing really doing in terms of grade A chances in that third period. First thing to talk about, as I said I would, Jones and Dell. So Jones lets in the first 3 goals of this game. The Eakin, Miller, and Pacioretty one gets pulled within the first 7 or so minutes, which is some big deja vu. If you remember just, the 7-3 game the Sharks lost, Jones was also pulled somewhat early in the first, not this early, but I think it was like 10 or 11 minutes in after letting in 3 goals. And these were just not good goals. I mean, the Eakin one, I'll give it to him because it's a terrible defensive play from the San Jose Sharks, but you'd hope he has the Miller one. You definitely hope he has the Pacioretty one, which, by the way, is another one where Jones plays the angle poorly, something I mentioned on the Mark Stone goal in Game 1, that he doesn't play the angle well. He doesn't do it again here. It seems as though the Golden Knights are going far side on Martin Jones on a lot of these shots, and so he needs to make these saves, especially with what Fleury was doing at the other side of the ice. I had said coming in that the Sharks, offensively and defensively, on paper, were the better team. We saw that heavily in Game 1, and we even saw that for the majority of Game 2, but the goaltending is where the Golden Knights have the advantage, and while it wasn't really there in Game 1, as Jones was okay and Fleury was also okay, in Game 2 it was completely apparent with Fleury playing a very good game and Martin Jones just not doing anything for his team. And Aaron Dell, while he was better than Martin Jones, although it didn't take much to do that, he wasn't that spectacular himself, because honestly, once Dell took the net, the Sharks really cleaned it up and basically didn't allow any sort of good chances I mean, there were some decent chances, but none actually had to be saved, as they were sort of just shot wide. Aaron Dell wasn't really tasked with making a big save, I don't even think, for the majority of the rest of the first period. Even he did come up with some nice ones, especially late in the second period, which could have definitely deflated the momentum, although it didn't end up mattering, with some a very nice glove save. I think it was on Pacioretty or on Tuck or somebody like that. But he made a couple of nice saves, certainly, but he was only tasked with making, about 15 shots in about 54 minutes of play, while Jones had 7 shots in about 6 minutes of play. And so both goaltenders, while Jones was worse, were not impressive enough. Jones will certainly get the start in Game 3, and he needs to be better, because it seems as though the Sharks as a group are playing better than the Golden Knights. And if Jones can just play at an acceptable level, not even, world beater level, not even what Fleury was here tonight, he just has to play at an acceptable level like he did in Game 1, and the Sharks should be able to win this series. But if he plays like he does here in this Game 2, I don't have faith in Aaron Dell to fill in for him necessarily, and this could end up being a series that the Golden Knights end up winning just on the back of Fleury being that much better than Martin Jones, which would be extremely disappointing for the Sharks. On to the power play. The Sharks had 5 in Game 1. They scored 1 goal, which wasn't terrible. They had 8 in this game. They scored 1 goal, but they gave up 2 shorthanded goals. So in a total of 13 power plays, they have gone an even 0 because of the fact that they have 2 power play goals and gave up 2 shorthanded goals, which is just completely unacceptable, especially when you consider the fact that of the 8 power plays, there was about a minute of 5-on-3 time. The Sharks need to be so much better on the power play. The special teams are so important. We saw a 3-on-3 goal and a 4-on-4 goal in the first game. We saw another 4-on-4 goal in this game. The Knights just seem completely lost in that area. And if the Knights are going to be taking these undisciplined penalties, which they have been in both games, the Sharks need to capitalize. I mean, if they don't give up any shorthanded goals in this game is tied at 3 technically, and even with just a 1-8 power play, if the Sharks don't give up any shorthanded goals and actually have a decent power play and score like a couple of goals at the very least, this could be a very, very different game. So this power play definitely needs to step up. It has so much skill on it. It's like a disaster with the fact that this power play is only even 0 after getting 13 power plays through just 2 games. It reminds me a lot of early on in the Edmonton series a couple of years back, where the Sharks had a ton of power plays, just couldn't convert. And while that was a split in Edmonton when they were the home team, they ended up losing that series. Hopefully that doesn't happen here in this one. Next is Timo Meier, who I had originally predicted would be a big factor in this series. He ended up getting very little ice time in Game 1, but I sort of looked over that because of such a successful Game 1. In this game, he actually has the lowest ice time for forwards not on the 4th line. So of the Sharks' top 9 forwards down the first 3 lines, Meier had the least amount with just about 11.5. And while Meier, his play style would make him very useful in games against the Golden Knights, it feels as though because of how poor Meier was down the stretch defensively, DeBoer doesn't seem to trust him in some areas. There were some shifts in which it was Couture, Pavelski, and Kane as a line. Meier not getting that much ice time, which is extremely disappointing. You would really hope that, Hertl, Kane, and and Meyer could be guys who are logging at the very least something like 17 minutes a night. Hurdle and Kane, yeah, you could play them more than that. Maybe Meyer, you don't play more than that, but still 11 and a half. And I don't even know how much I blame De Boer for that, because he has been very rough defensively. It has been somewhat disappointing to see him make some poor passes, some poor plays out of his own zone. He seems to give up somewhat back-checking wise. He at times gets a bit lost and caught watching the puck, and it seems as though De Boer has taken notice and has limited his ice time somewhat. And again, it's very tragic because of how useful Meyer could be just in the way he plays in this series, and it just hasn't really been able to be unlocked just yet. Final thing to talk about would be a very worrying situation for the San Jose Sharks going forward. Marc-Edouard Vlasic, it seems as though blocked a shot early in the second period, never returned after that. And in the regular season, it's still somewhat worrying, but whatever. But if a player sustains an injury in a playoff game and does not return, that is a huge worrying sign going forward, honestly enough. We saw Meyer, after a high stick up high, he came back. Pavelski, it looked like he almost broke his jaw with the puck to the chin. He came back in that game. Couture takes a puck to the groin. No man would ever come back from that, but Couture manages to do that at the start of the third period. But Vlasic doesn't return in this game, which is a huge problem, because Vlasic is another left-handed defenseman. So right now, you either put Tim Heed suboptimally on his offside, or you put in Jacob Middleton, which again is suboptimal, and you were already planning on playing Ryan just a few minutes a game. Ryan just barely, even with 5 defensemen, just barely passed Vlasic in ice time. I think Ryan had about 7.5, while Vlasic had 7. And so if you have to now have 2 defensemen who you really limit in terms of ice time, and you're just running with Carlson, Burns, Dillon, and Braun, that could actually start to be an issue, where with just leaving Ryan off on the sidelines just as the one defenseman and running with 5 was at least okay. This could be very, very bad, especially when you consider the fact that Vlasic was probably one of the better Sharks defensemen down the stretch when the Sharks were losing. He was very good in game 1, and he started this game decently at the very least. And you have to consider the fact that I didn't like Braun's game here tonight. I thought he was subpar. I liked Erik Karlsson offensively, but he had a lot of defensive mistakes. Reminded me a lot of early in the season Erik Karlsson, like October, November Erik Karlsson, where he would make some very nice plays, but just some poor passes in his defensive zone. I thought Burns was okay. Some decent defensive plays, but also some poor defensive plays. And so the Sharks really need Vlasic in this situation. So if he is actually out for an extended period of time, and considering the fact he doesn't return in this game, that is a high possibility. The Sharks could be in big trouble. They've been dealing with a lot of this bad luck injury-wise so far in this series, even if a couple of those players have returned, while the Golden Knights haven't really dealt with any of that thus far. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action in Vegas for Game 3 on Sunday. A bit of an earlier start there. The Sharks, as I said, have lost a game at home now. They'll try and regain home ice advantage by getting a win in Vegas. We'll see if they can do that. The Vegas Golden Knights, a fantastic home team, but the Sharks, as I said, if you discount Martin Jones, you just look at the 18 skaters, have looked like the much better team for the majority of these first 2 games, and we'll see if that can carry into the next one, if Martin Jones can step up his game, because honestly, this game is almost entirely of the fault of both him and, to a lesser extent, Aaron Dell. Class dismissed.